Um, welcome to Coach's Corner. Hello, everybody. Welcome.
Hello.
Welcome. I'm Justin Schollard, and
I'm Ethan Wolf.
And we are your co-hosts for today and forever, hopefully, and maybe one day we'll be your real coaches. IRL.
Earl.
Or in real Zoom video calls, because we do that too. But that's not what today's episode is about.
No, it's not.
Today we're going to be talking about, and I'd like to do more of these actually.
It's a big can of worms.
Yeah, it's tough. You know, basically what we're going to be talking about today is the documentary, You Are What You Eat. Mm-hmm. And there's been a series of these documentaries, Game Changers,
Forks Over Knives,
I think, Live to 100 or Blue Zones or Live to 100.
Well, Blue Zone wasn't necessarily, that's just studying Blue Zone.
I think it was, wasn't it?
I only watched the first episode, but so far, no food agenda.
Okay. Well, there was one like Live to 100 that was definitely,
I could see that,
had an agenda, and that's basically what we're going to be talking about today is these documentaries that they are made to appear very neutral. Mm-hmm. They're highly produced. They're beautifully shot. Yeah. And they do have some valid points, but I think, you know, when you really look at it from like an objective eye, you just see the imbalance and like the skewing towards veganism, which I'm not opposed to veganism.
No.
You know what I mean?
I think it's just such a mixed bag with so many caveats to it. And I think just, you know, I know for me when I was watching it, it was just trying to make sure I was looking at this rationally and objectively, and kind of try to move out of like dogma. And, you know, the documentary definitely opened my eyes or reminded me of some things, and there's definite truth to it. But at the same time, I think there's some holes in just how it was presented, whether or not the actual truth of what was happening was there or not. And yeah, I think that it's just interesting because I think the intent is always well with these people making these documentaries. Like, I don't think they're out to like rule the world or profiteer per se. Although,
well,
you never know.
TBD.
Yeah,
they didn't do it for free.
No, they didn't do it for free.
But I feel what bothers me is not the message. The message is fine. Like, listen, we should all eat more vegetables. We should all try to eat less factory farm meat. Like, I agree with that. But you do get the sense that they're trying to position it as if it's just this, like, controlled group clinical study that's conclusive evidence to support that veganism is better for you. And when you watch them go through their litany of experts and they just start throwing out random shit, like they had that neurologist who was like, saturated fat will give you diabetes. And it's like, what? Wait a minute. Saturated fat will give you diabetes, man. What is this, like 1990? We're still talking about like low-fat diets? Like, saturated fat has nothing to do with diabetes. The overconsumption of calories in general that can clog your metabolism could lead to diabetes, metabolic disease, but saturated fat in isolation, what is he talking about?
You know, it's like we've been eating saturated fat for so long.
And he's a neurologist, but that's the thing, is they just like manufacture these experts to try to put their opinions into these documentaries to prove their point. And like, that's where it just like, I can't help but just go, oh God.
Right. And, you know, just to be clear, you know, to speak for Justin, like he has made it put a large effort forth to try to eat as minimal amount of meat, basically. Yeah. You know, still including some dairy, but I've watched, you know, him go from eating large quantities of ground beef for breakfast and just doing what you got to do to get your macros
All about the numbers, bro.
Yeah, which is still the case, but has because of factory farming and because of environment, you know, as I understand it. Yeah. So it's not that veganism or eating less animal products is bad and that we're just shunning veganism. And I just want to say that, I think, because I don't necessarily want people to just assume like, oh, here there's these guys just ragging on veganism.
Soy
it's
boys.
Like he's living it more so than I am. I eat way more animal product, I think, than you do now at this point. So Just to be clear, it's not that.
Yeah, I'm
again,
not against being vegan. I'm not against like eating more plants and vegetables, but obviously but it's like we can't just like muck it all up into one topic. It's like you have to parse out the differences, and that's I think what irks me a little bit about these documentaries is that when they show meat and they show animal products, it's only in the context of McDonald's
Yeah.
or fast food or
Like
processed
hot
like
dogs.
spam.
Yeah, like hot dogs and spam, and it's like, yeah, okay, understandably, that's not going to serve anybody, right? Like, we shouldn't be just chomping on spam as our
So
primary
as if
food
those were only
cornerstone.
two options: is spam and hot dogs or veganism? And obviously, we should all be vegan if those were the only two options that we have.
Yeah.
The answer is maybe in the middle somewhere. I don't know.
Yeah, it was interesting because I'll start off by saying, like, it was hard to be reminded of factory farming and
Yes.
like just how gross it really is. And it's like I've always known, I've seen the videos in the past, and it's just one of those things that I used to like do butcher box in an attempt to only eat pastured meats and grass-fed meat, heritage pork if I'm going to eat it, pastured chicken. I have not done that in a while, a couple of years, but I was doing that for at least 5 years in an attempt to move in that direction, and have since fallen off. And it was definitely hard to witness the factory farming again. There's just no way around
Definitely.
that the way our society and globally participates with meat consumption is just terrible. There's no way around it. And so, and I think that's a situation more that meat is bad for you kind of conversation, rather than just saying like, well, meat is bad. I think factory farming is bad, and profiteering and having corporations like McDonald's available at every corner, and having production be so high so that you can get the cheapest cheeseburger possible is not a good thing. And that's like a whole cultural conversation.
Right. On the other hand, though, we have in this country 400 million people to feed, and globally 8 billion.
Yeah.
And what made humans is cultivating their farmland and moving from hunter-gatherers to settling in and raising livestock and farming. And so this is just sort of the 2020-24 version of feeding an enormous population. And I totally agree. Like when you see these videos, yeah, it's like, man, I wish there was a better option. And there is. Listen, like we could all do grass-fed. We could all do
or just eat
local
less
farms.
meat, I think, is another component of just eating less meat, right? So it's like America is like the leader in meat consumption, as I understand it, in terms of just the amount of meat. Because
per capita, or like just like a volume of the country?
I think just volume of the country.
Because I think
we're
like,
a really
if you go to,
large
like
country.
Argentina, like per capita, they eat way more meat than
right,
we do.
but we just, and like, and like, for example, like it's like watching the whole section on the Amazon being cut down for cattle was like just terrible, because the Amazon's supposed to be like the lungs of the planet. You have so much biodiversity there. So many undiscovered insects and plants and animals that are just thriving in those rainforests. And it was just interesting because it was basically like you cut down the forest, burn it, make fertile soil, plant grass, raise your cattle, and then within a certain amount of time, it like that particular parcel of land stops becoming profitable, I guess, because of like the grass isn't growing as well.
Well, probably just like monocultured.
And then they basically go and just cut down more because the money stops coming in. And so it's this kind of like whole supply demand of like people want that much meat, they want the money. And so it's just kind of like this whole kind of cycle. And so I was thinking about it, and it's like it would really have to be a complete revolution of culture to stop the momentum. And I'm not saying it's not worth moving towards, but it's like it was just kind of like, wow, this isn't... Every decision will help, but like there can't be McDonald's on every corner.
Right.
You can't have all-you-can-eat barbecue joints. You can't... It's just not possible, right? It's just...
Yeah, I mean, it's not sustainable.
It's not sustainable.
And
Well, it's possible. It's happening.
I think that this is the difference, right? So imagine a world where we didn't necessarily just go and consume meat every single meal because it's just baked into our culture, but we were just a little bit more aware of our choices and the consequence of those choices and understanding. And that's where I will give these documentaries some credit. And I think that's what you meant to say too, is like, they're not wrong. Like factory farming is disgusting.
Terrible.
Plowing down the Amazon to raise cattle is awful, right?
Yeah,
it's like,
just not, yeah.
right? We're also in an impossible situation where there is just such inertia in that direction, and that like what motivates companies to feed people is profit, and that doesn't necessarily make them evil. It just means that they're supplying a demand that exists,
and it's
if
just the way
they
things
don't
have
do
been.
it, someone has to. And the vast majority of people live in a city, so we can't just like raise our own shit,
No,
and
it's
the price margin between like pasture raised and grass fed is pretty steep, and so it isolates a lot of people.
Yeah, 100%.
So-
And it's a whole idea of like infinite growth models, which we don't have infinite resources and all that stuff. So that's a whole thing. And then there are health ramifications because of the factory farming too, right? So like for poultry, for example, they found that if they just do low level antibiotics all the time, it prevents disease, but it also prolongs animals' lives. So they live longer, they grow faster too by having low-level antibiotics. And so in that capacity, one of the things they talked about in the documentary was your gut flora, because now that's like the hot new thing. It's very legitimate. They have ability to test it now. And everybody in the vegan meal plan had a proliferation of, they only cycled in on like by Bifora, I can't remember right now, but it's a very, very important one in our biome. And everybody's increased on the vegetarian, whereas everybody pretty much stayed the same. Didn't necessarily decrease, but pretty much stayed the same on the omnivore.
And just so you guys are clear, so we're clear, this documentary basically took a set of twins, and the premise was that they were going to have them one twin because they're genetically identical. So in theory, it makes for good science.
Yeah, it does.
But they were supposed to take, one twin was supposed to just be completely vegan for 8 weeks. Yep. The other twin was going to do more of an omnivore diet for 8 weeks. They were supposed to work out and do all the other things. But that was the premise. And I think that the execution of it failed a little bit.
For me, I agree.
But that was the idea, and then at the end of this 8-week period, they were going to test their blood and their gut biome and see who's healthier chronologically, biologically.
Yeah, they basically did all these tests, like a fitness test, urine test, blood samples, fecal matter samples, and did like a before and after. And so it's like, okay, so gut biome is definitely super important, right? Obviously, eating more vegetables and plants that have fiber, prebiotics, which allow your bacteria to feed and grow and proliferate, is going to be a good thing. And therefore, factory farming, which has antibiotics in it, and introducing antibiotics into your system on a consistent basis through meat is going to be bad. And so in that capacity, I can see how eating meat or including meat in your diet from factory farm sources is going to have a negative impact on your health. Like that's an A to B to C that I can get behind, that isn't necessarily too hard to lean on one, too hard on the other. Now, can you supplement that with eating like fermented foods and things to make a difference and encourage a healthier gut biome? Probably, but that's just one thing that I will recognize. But I also think that you could just also do your best to eat more fruits and vegetables, even if you do eat meat. Because I think that nobody eats enough vegetables, meat eater or not. No. And having more color and more textures and more variety of stuff on your plate is always going to be beneficial.
But that's where I think this documentary was just so skewed in this into like a vegan agenda, that when you don't nuance it, where you can still eat lean protein, and even if that lean protein is factory farmed, and even if there's trace amounts of antibiotics, what this documentary said in the very first episode, they were interviewing all these experts and they were doing the DEXA scan for the twins. It was like, muscle mass is your health. Muscle mass is your fountain of youth. And then go on to document these people over their 8-week journey.
Yep.
And like the people who were vegan, like basically experienced like zero muscle mass gain, or
substantially different lesson. Like a lot of it was also through, and it is interesting because in just the last episode, they're like one of the driving home messages was the most important thing that you can do is what you put in your mouth. Like you can't shape your genes, but you can how your genes express, like talking about epigenetics and all that
yeah.
kind of stuff, right? And I'm behind that. But then it's interesting because, to your point right there, saying muscle mass is the most important thing. In a previous episode, we talked about, I stated the statistic that the number one thing that determines cancer survival, no matter what kind of cancer, is the amount of lean muscle mass you have in your body, right? So, and then everybody who basically committed to the resistance exercise were the ones who got more lean mass on them, whether they were vegan or otherwise. Now, the omnivores, seemingly on more of the groups, both had more protein in their diet, from what I gathered, but also just really committed to the resistance and put on a tremendous amount of muscle, especially the untrained individuals. And what I took away from that, like if I were to create an A to B based on my knowledge and just paying attention, is that resistance training seemed to be the most important thing. Yeah. You know, and not to say that all these other factors weren't being affected by eating a healthier diet, but almost like if we look at this one thing that could really determine how long you're going to live, decreasing overall mortality rates and all this, like decreasing metabolic disease, all this stuff, it's your lean mass. And everybody who just really committed to fucking busting ass in the gym, vegan or not, just got that result. And so I took away that, like, oh, kind of like resistance training, and not even just walking, but like resistance training is one of the most important things you can do.
That's what the study we came across when we were doing the episode on like strength training. It's like you can actually eat like shit, and still pretty much prevent your chances of premature death by getting your VO2 max up and resistance training.
Yeah.
If you just strength train and get your cardio levels up, even if you eat like shit, omnivore, keto, vegan, you're going to be probably ahead of 80% of people out there who aren't exercising but are obsessing over every little micro and macronutrient.
Yeah.
And this kind of exactly, I think, exposes the issues with their approach to this study, which was not done in a way that anybody who understands science and controlled group and clinical trials would appreciate, because there were so many unknowns. Like
so many.
So they had one twin be omnivore, which they ate from Trifecta,
which is a meal delivery service.
Which is a meal delivery service. Like, oh, Trifecta is and now we're going to support the omnivores meal plans. And then they had the other twin just be vegan, but they gave us zero information on calories. They gave us zero information on proteins or macros. So if this was going to be done right, they should have had the exact same calories and the exact same macros, the exact same exercise routine, and then it would have been a really interesting study on truly the only difference was plant-based versus not. But there's so many other variables that it just kind of makes the study null and void. If you ask me.
I mean, exactly. To me, it's like if you're going to talk about what we eat and you're not going to bring in caloric needs and macro breakdown as just not even like the point of it, but just like here is the foundation upon which we are building out our food choices. I'm kind of like, okay, well, what happened then? You know, because like we've talked about, any decrease in body composition or any shifting in body composition from like losing fat has tremendous health benefits, just from that alone. And so we all know generally animal products are more calorically dense because they're higher in protein, higher in fat for the most part than vegan options. And so a part of me was like, well, did the vegans just like eat less calories because it's hard to get enough? And so we just, the fact that they just didn't even name, they're doing all these tests like the DEXA scan and doing all this stuff and getting with these professional trainers and taking it all so seriously. But they never said, okay, your daily, calorie requirement is this. And so we're going to put this individual here and we're going to put this individual here. We're going to give you this many grams of protein. This is how we're going to do it on the vegan plan because we all know the protein's super important. So I think there's just like this huge hole in the fact that we're talking about food and it was only about meat or no meat. Right at the end, I think it was one of the twin sisters was like, oh, I feel like I'm cheating right now because they were eating like an all-vegetarian meal and they were like making traditional foods, but vegan, excuse me. And she was like, I feel like I'm cheating right now, but I'm not because there's no meat. And I'm like, were those egg rolls deep fried? How much seed oil are we? How much calories are we consuming? Like it was only this lens of I'm not cheating and it's all good because there's just no meat. Not like how much fat, how many calories I'm producing. Not am I going to gain weight. Not am I going to still be obese. Not if I'm still going to introduce metabolic disease and heart disease and all the stuff into my life just from being overweight. Which a lot of the subjects were extremely overweight. And it's like, okay, which is just, they can't help that. They're twins, probably. But I'm like, you know, I feel like we're missing a huge backbone.
Well, and also as if like when we talk about meat eaters, and they're talking about ever since World War II to get our soldiers up to, because they were all malnourished and underweight, and so
away.
That's when factory farming and meating really packaged food really took off to like help beef everybody up a little bit. But then it's like when you think about, because listen, I own a weight loss company. I own a weight loss coaching company.
It's a purpose.
Called Carbon Fitness Method. And what we do is we bring everybody through the first week of data collection. Guess what? These people who are struggling to lose 30, 40, 50, 60, 100 pounds, and we let them eat normally for a week and just jot everything down. Mm-hmm. Just jot everything down. These people who are not vegans, they would claim to like meat. Guess where they are typically always deficient? Protein.
Surprise, surprise.
It's not like people are hammering protein. In fact, getting their protein levels up through meat or protein shakes or vegan, whatever means necessary, is the hardest hurdle for people to do.
Always.
And so it's not like people who are struggling with health issues are plowing through 2, 3, 4 times the recommended amount of protein per day. In fact, most people are way deficient in proteins, even though they would identify as an omnivore or a meat eater.
Yep.
And so it's like one McDonald's burger might have 15 grams of a thin little patty in it, but it's the fries, it's the buns, it's the mayo, it's the Coke.
Yeah.
It's so many other variables that are factoring into this person's lack of health, not the little thing. Now, that doesn't mean that we should do everything we can to make better choices and understand that factory farming is destroying our planet. And when you take that little 15-gram protein patty and you multiply that by 400 million people, it's a problem now.
Yeah, that is.
But typically it's not the linchpin of why this person's healthy or not, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And it goes, you know, and this is where it's such a broad, caveated subject, because French fries, sugar, donuts, I mean, there's so many things that can be vegan. Mm-hmm. Have the potential to be vegan and are just completely
I was gonna say milkshakes, but
not happy.
Vegan milkshakes.
Vegan milkshakes. But they're not, I mean, French fries is a great example. Like that's a vegan food, but it's not good for you.
Right.
It's just not good for you, right? Not to say they're not delicious, but they're just not good for you. And so if we know that obesity and lowering obesity reduces all of the risk factors and death, I mean, you know, if we're just looking at it from that, and we know that that's calories in, calories out, the amount of energy, that, you know, we're not addressing that in the conversation about optimal health and just like meat just being this terrible thing that just is like killing you. It just isn't quite exactly how I think the picture is really painted in a whole. Mm-hmm. And it's just interesting because they really push like vegan cheeses and all these things, which I think is great. And they're the whole point of it being to get meat eaters more comfortable eating vegan products. And I think that's all good, but a lot of these products are still going to be high in fat. Mm-hmm. You know, if you look at the Impossible meat, which is not my favorite, and I understand, again, why it exists, and I'm not saying that eating more Impossible style foods and that kind of thing is bad, but the bottom line is that like that has a tremendous amount of fat in it. Mm-hmm. As I understand it, it's not
sodium
fat-free.
too. Like one patty's got like almost 1,000 milligrams of sodium in it. It's wild.
And so it's like, you know, I just don't think it's just such an interesting perspective, because I think there was a tremendous amount of evidence that including a diverse and more plants in your diet is a beneficial thing, which I think I even took away. I tend to eat a fair amount of vegetables, but I'm going to ramp it up.
Yeah.
Try to get more colors. Like I made some roasted beets the other day, actually outside of this, but you know, I hadn't roasted beets in a while. It's great. Put a little goat cheese on them, but I had some microgreens on there.
But you know, Tanya is lactose intolerant, so a lot of our cheese stuff is like vegan cheese alternatives, like our sour creams, our butters, our mayos. I could care less. Like, it's delicious. I don't mind. I can't even really notice a difference half the time. If I'm just sprinkling a little vegan cheese over like a taco, it's totally cool.
Yeah.
I don't mind that. And I almost wish that the documentaries would stop trying to like bury the lead and stop trying to like hide their agenda. And whenever they talk about meat, it's always this like spam McDonald's grayed out, disgusting thing. And whenever they talk about the vegetables, it's always in like veganism, it's always like these bright, shiny video images of these like radiant people.
Yeah.
It's like that bothers me because it's just such an agenda. I almost just wish they would.
The filming when they had the germs on the refrigerator handle, and it was like a murder scene. It was like all dramatic music, like honing in on the handle of the refrigerator, like covered in blood or germs. And it's like, I just remember that shot. I'm like, I get it. I mean, I get you're trying to get a point across.
Most salmonella poisoning doesn't come from meat; it comes from vegetables.
Right, and then it's also like you have the genital test was another one that got me, where I'm like, okay, you're rating the arousal rates of these women. It was the first ever test on women's arousal rates and veganism and food and all this stuff. And I'm like, of course, the vegan won as being something beneficial. But what I also noticed is that the people that exercised more had a tremendous increase in their arousal rates.
Kind of.
And I'm like, okay, yeah, so your heart's beating better, your vascular system's better,
right.
You're just more healthy overall from just exercising, and now you get more aroused.
Now you get a boner.
Yeah, and so it's just so funny, and I'm also like, isn't that something, because they're having them watch porn, which is such a subjective
such a weird
thing,
angle.
and they're like letting them choose what they want. And the first time she got measured, she's like, "Oh, I didn't really like the guy. He wasn't that attractive in the porno." And I'm like, "Well, isn't that such going to affect your arousal rate? It's not like they just have like an arousal button to like have, you get more or less excited based on different stimulus."
And also like you're in like a laboratory, in like a room in a laboratory, watching a porno or having like these things locked. It's like that's not like exactly set in the mood.
And like they got the responses. It's not to say that there didn't show differences, but I'm just like, is that really because they were eating vegetarian? Like I can't create a causational A to B that just because they had more blood in their pussies that they were fucking.
Because they were eating their spinach.
They were eating their spinach. Yeah. I just can't. I just couldn't.
I mean, it's just so ridiculous.
It's like, why did they include that in this?
Because they're trying to hit it from all the angles,
Well, and that's kind of my thing. Is that like, why? Like, is this really showing what we need to see out of it? And it's just so interesting because they're talking about like, oh, there's this one compound that's released when you eat meat in your body, which has been shown to be inflammatory in certain levels. And this is very ubiquitous language. And they're like, look, the people who ate vegan had none of this chemical in their body.
Yeah.
And the omnivores had this chemical in their body. And I'm like, well, that opening line is a pretty ambiguous line. Has been shown to potentially be inflammatory at like certain levels. I'm like, well, what does that even mean?
Yeah. I mean, listen, anybody, okay.
I think
I like we hang out with a bunch of people who are mainly women who are mainly looking to, drop a few pounds, and they see this and it's like, if you're not in this industry and you're not a health a health coach of some capacity or a weight loss coach or anything like that, and you're just taking this stuff at face value, it looks really good. It's like very shiny. It's highly produced. And there's all these like professionals giving their little anecdotes and their one-liners and then these graphs, and it's like it can appear very scientific. But if you've ever actually just pulled one layer deeper and read a double-blind study or read a clinical trial, and you actually see how they're conducted, that it just immediately loses all credibility when you watch these documentaries, because they're just done in a way where everything is anecdotal, everything is theoretical, everything is observational or personal, where it's like, well, I just felt better, but you can't really quantify that or measure that. It's just a person's opinion.
Yeah, well, even the things they measured, I was surprised at how much leeway they allowed it. And I understand that these are people living their lives. Like, I think of the two cheese guys,
right,
one of them had kids, one of them didn't. So your life is going to be very different, a lot more variables at play, more or less free time available, all that stuff. But it's just so interesting because that ending thing with like how much lean mass they've had and how much their VO2 max has increased, is also action dependent. And even with this controlled, we're sending them the food and we're giving them a trainer, it seemed like there was a huge leeway between certain people and certain twins where they just didn't exercise as much or they didn't eat the food that was sent to them.
You're right.
And adherence, I understand, is like you can't like lock them up in a laboratory and watch every move and force them to eat the food. Mm-hmm. But if the adherence isn't there, then how can we know? And that's, I think, the tricky part with any food study is like, how do you know what is really happening?
And that's just, and I think that's just like they were trying to do too many things. If they just would have slowed it down a little bit and been like, okay, everybody's going to have all of their food, because they obviously had money to make this documentary. It was done by Stanford or some doctor at Stanford, and then like they had money. They partnered up with Trifecta or Factor, whoever it was, for the Omnivore's meal delivery, but they didn't do that with the vegans, which is odd.
I don't know if they. Yeah, that's. They only referenced it to the Omnivores.
Yeah. Well, it looked like just the Omnivores were getting theirs from Factor, because Factor, I did it for a little while, and it's pretty much just a lot of meat. I don't know if they have vegan. Maybe they do. I don't know. But like,
I'm sure they do.
But they should have just like got everybody's calories stable, because they're twins. They're genetically identical. Mm-hmm. So then why not exact same calorie levels, exact same protein levels, and then kept their exercise standardized. It can be minimal. It doesn't need to be epic, but just like standardized, where it's like, 20 minutes of the exact same exercise 3 days a week. So everything was completely standardized, and the only variable was omnivore versus vegan, but proteins, calories, exercise, all the same.
Yeah, I don't understand like how you hire 2 trainers, but yet somehow they're not going into the gym to do the workouts. Yeah. I'm like, well, what's the point of like, well, how can you compare the lean muscle mass of a vegan to an omnivore gained in 8 weeks if one of the people just like doesn't do resistance training on either side? I'm like, doesn't that just like skew these results tremendously?
Yeah, I mean, if even if you're an omnivore and you're in protein, but you're just not exercising at all, and the vegan is exercising, he's going to see benefits. And I think that was one of the issues, is like, in fact, it was the opposite, where one of the cheese twin guys, the guy who has the kids who also got assigned to do vegan, mm-hmm. life got in the way. He couldn't exercise. He couldn't keep it up. Yep. He was fledgling. But they kept making excuses for him, right?
Yeah, they're just like, well, he's not taking the study as seriously, but he's got other stuff going on, which is like true in a potential. But then it's like, yeah, does the omnivore get that kind of a...
Well, that's my question, because this is obviously a vegan agenda documentary. If the omnivore was one fledgling and having struggling in his workouts and skipping, would they give him the same leeway?
Yeah, okay. And then there was the 2 nurses, the 2 dudes that were nurses, mm-hmm. that were going to be twins. And so this is another one where it's like, okay, we have all these ones like, oh, you gained more muscle mass, but it's because you were hitting the gym extra hard and you just weren't eating enough. You didn't eat enough. That's why I didn't, And so it's like, okay, not talking about, oh, well, it looks like the omnivore really worked. It was always because of this gym stimulus. And then, mm-hmm. The lady who's doing the reviews was just like, I wanted there to be the one vegan that gained muscle mass. I wanted the one vegan. I just was hoping it would happen. And so then the 2 nurse dudes came in, and they were both already fit and already very low in body fat. And apparently they were already both under eaters. Mm. So apparently they both didn't eat enough in general. And so now here they come. They're on this very strict. They clearly were going and doing the exercise. They probably took the exercise very seriously, and they seem to take the study very seriously. And that dude was the vegan guy who gained muscle. And they just made such a big deal about it, seemingly, in my opinion, like such a shining light on it. Like, oh, he did it. I knew there would be at least one guy that, one person that could get the vegan muscle gain. And all I'm thinking about, well, what if he was just under eating calories in the first place? And then you introduced weight training and an actual appropriate amount of calories, even if it was from veganism. Mm-hmm. And now he puts on muscle, and it's just like, oh, like, wait, look.
Right.
You can do it with veganism. And I'm like, well, yeah, you can, but we're actually just looking at macros.
Yeah.
And resistance training. We're not, like, it doesn't... And I'm just like,
Yeah. So, and it's like, we were talking about when we were preparing for this show, we were talking about the egg study that came out 15 years ago or so that kind of like rocked everybody's world. And it was very much in this same vein of like all like headline sort of, linked to eggs and high cholesterol heart disease because, or I think the headline was, eggs are as bad for you as smoking.
Yeah. Oh, it was out of control.
And it just lit everybody up. And at this time, Ethan and I were working together at some gym, and like we were in our 20s, and all of our clients were coming in and reading this study. Now the version of this is these documentaries, but back then it was like a New York Times article or something like that. And like, oh, they've linked heart disease to eggs. And then when you actually read the study, guess what? It was a fucking observational study where they asked senior citizens with like dementia and heart disease to reflect back on their life over the last 60 years, and did they eat eggs? And the people would be like, they would be like, yeah, as a matter of fact, I did eat eggs a few times a week. Oh, there you go. We got a link between heart disease and eating eggs.
Because it was some absurd, like eating 2 eggs a day is equivalent to like smoking a pack of cigarettes.
Right.
Just like, okay,
it's
that's
so
quite
ridiculous.
the claim, And I just think that if we're, I guess for me, it's like if you're going to take it as being more healthy versus environmental impact, the sustainability of our world as it currently is, and what is like a better choice to make, eating meat or being vegan. That's like to me are 2 very different things. And it just, I feel like they really were going for the health avenue, and I feel like that they didn't address the primary things of just like, you're overweight, you're going to be more prone to disease, whether you eat meat or not, right? And I think, if people are going to talk about being able to get an erection or being able to be aroused and they're not exercising and they're overweight, I don't think meat's making you not have a heart-on. I eat a lot of meat. I don't necessarily have an issue.
You've got a hard-on right now.
Yeah, I didn't want to say anything, but so I keep knocking them. No, but so it's like, for me, it's like things like that where it's like you're taking all these accounts in and you're trying to just make it about only eating plants or eating animals, and I just think that that's not what really is going to be determining your health.
Right.
There's so many cofactors. So I think that, and I think if for me, it would have a more impact it already had impact for me to encourage me to eat more, maybe eat less meat. So in that sense, I saw what they were trying to say and I let it in. But I think it would have been even more potent if it was an angle of our current model of factory farming and introducing meat into the American diet is not sustainable. And here's why. And here are the negative benefits of factory farming.
Yeah.
That's kind of making this not good for you. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah, I agree. And I that's what I was trying to get to earlier is like, I just wish that they would have been a little bit more transparent about it and just been like, hey, listen, like, ideally, we would all prefer to not have to eat factory farming. Here's some benefits of it. Like, give us a real good study on like the benefits of eating more vegetables, but not in such a way that makes it feel like we should be ashamed of ourselves if we're eating meat. And I just feel like it just got lost for me in the agenda of what they were trying to push. And to your point, like, yeah, there is a lot of interesting stuff, and there's no doubt that there's disgusting things that take place in these factory farms, and we would all be better off if we could just not do it. But I just feel like it was very one-sided and out of balance, and just was hard to not spot the holes in their approach. Yeah. And to me, that diminished their message.
Yeah. No, I agree. I mean, it's because I'm thinking about the pig excrement being sprayed on the locals in like Georgia or wherever it was. And, it's this whole thing, and they were talking about how like that they wouldn't be happening on like higher income neighborhoods.
Right.
And, and so it's like for me, there's so much of it was really a conversation about the current state of our culture and politics and profit and our economy and just this whole house of cards, which I don't know what the answer is. And like, is eating less meat one of the answers? Probably. But if all of these issues exist in our social, political, economic environment, and everybody just stops deciding to eat pork, I don't think that those imbalances are going to just magically go away. I'm sure it'll have an effect, but it's like, in a certain sense, they're like bigger stones to flip in there, in my opinion.
And also, like, well, then what would it look like then if, all of a sudden, like, let's just say 8 billion people were vegan? Like, how much farmland would that take? I don't know. Right?
Well, I was actually, and so it's interesting because, so there's another documentary. So Impossible Meats and these, meat replacement products were really pushed, and some of them looked really good. I was like, oh wow, they're actually making them much more appetizing. And I was curious about them. I'd love to try them, but Impossible Meat was one of the cornerstones. They interviewed the founder. He had quite a large voice, and there's actually a documentary out called Beyond Impossible, which is all just about how the Impossible Meat company and meat replacements are all just profiteering and agenda based for these companies, and apparently like some religious organization is behind this, and that it's all just for money, and that like so many of the facts they are stating don't actually line up with what they're saying about like environmentalism. And it's funny because this one is very propagandic. I started to watch like 15 minutes of it just to see, and it's like unabashedly like, this is all bullshit, this is the real deal, and it's equally shot and filmed and presented in a way. But the fact that there's even a documentary, I'm going to want to finish it, that is all about how Impossible Meat is a fraud.
Yeah.
And it's just like, and it just goes into like, I don't know. Because they were talking about methane. It was just very interesting. It's just one example, and I'm not going to, if somebody out there knows the real deal, let's go ahead, post some studies, some comments. I'm curious. But they're citing methane as this terrible impact on the planet. And this is just also an example of both being propagandic. But they were saying that, like, unlike CO2, which lasts in the atmosphere for hundreds of thousands of years, or not like 1,000 years or something, methane only lasts for about a decade before it's like released. And so they were saying that all of this claim that methane is having this global warming effect is not true. But I'm like, well, there are a lot of cows, and even if it's only 10 years, I would see that being. But it's just so interesting because everybody's got their little facts and their little statements and their little studies.
Then it starts to get political at that point. It starts to get
political. Yeah, exactly. And that was one of the things they stated, that like only a certain percentage of the land is available for crops,
right,
that are able to grow anything in our planet, and so that they're just like they're cutting down the rainforest for cattle, that at one point we'd have to probably start making land available for soybeans if we're making a ton of soy. Anyway, it's just interesting. I'll have to. I wish I'd finished that documentary.
I think like it just kind of goes back to, we're all going to be exposed on some levels to things that are harming us, and then we can all excel in other areas and levels that are healing for us. And our life is just this constant sort of, calculation of, and this like aggregate of our choices and our experiences and our exposure to things.
Yeah.
No one gets out unscathed, and for that matter, no one gets out alive, right? But I think we can just do our best to manage some of the big rocks as far as health. And what do we know? What if, all of this kind of boils down to the same message that we have in so many of our episodes. It's like, whether you are vegan, whether you eat meat, whatever, some key factors are always at play. Get your body weight levels down.
Yeah.
If you can just do that, you're probably going to live a long, healthy life just by getting body weight down to a normal range.
Yep.
Put some muscle on through some exercise and training. Just lift weights. Even if you don't look like you're putting on muscle, but just sheerly putting yourself under a barbell or getting weights in your hands, like, you're going to improve the condition of your muscle, even if it doesn't show right away. And like, you just take care of those three things and just move your body and just try to eat less than what you burn. Like, you're probably going to be ahead of 80% of the people out there. And then like, if you want to get particular on food choice and macros, like, please, by all means, like, help us save this planet. But I just think that sometimes we miss these big key factors that account for 80 to 90% of our health, and we get caught up in the weeds on these like choices that are so marginal as far as our health goes. If the intention of this documentary and the intention of people's choices is to improve their health, then let's not ignore these pillars in what comprises health and not get caught up in the weeds on the 10%. Now, with that being said, we do have a planet we should be caring for. And
absolutely.
And in that regard, I'm 100% on board of like, wherever I can. Now, here, I'm just going to say, like, here's what I like to do. I love a steak, man. I got 2 pasture-raised steaks from New York strips from Whole Foods that I got today. They're thick. They're a special occasion.
You bastard.
I'm a murderer. But on a day-to-day basis, it's like if I can get 20 grams of protein through a shake or through some eggs, but I know you're like factory farming, I know, but my focus has always been more like non-kill protein. So that steak, something had to die for that.
The male chicks.
Yeah.
For your eggs.
For the eggs, right. But also, hens are going to lay eggs anyways. There's a whole argument here. That's not what I want to get into. Point is that it's a choice as opposed to just like eating chicken and beef all day long every day.
100%.
But like going for like a protein shake or like a vegan or whatever they call it, like a pea protein shake.
Yeah.
To get that 20 grams instead of like 4 ounces of chicken, like that's a choice that I'll make on a day-to-day basis. But I also like to reserve a little day here and there for a delicious steak if I so please. So I think that like for me, that's a trade-off that feels like I'm not restricting and denying myself, but also being conscious and trying to be a better steward of our environment by not just constantly defaulting to animal meat all the time.
Yeah, and I think, for me, I like the whole food approach, and so I'm not the biggest fan of fake meats. Mm-hmm. And protein's an issue, and so I think it's just the understanding that including more like legumes, seeds, and, legumes being beans and lentils in your diet to help, make sure that there's some hearty protein-centric foods at least. Never going to be as protein-centric as a lean piece of animal protein, but still, you're not just eating like broccoli and kale, which is pretty low in calorie and pretty devoid of any protein. I'm curious if somebody's going to would ever say that.
Pound
that
for pound.
Broccoli has as much
a
digestible protein. Yeah, so I think it's like for me, even in the conversation I was having with Amanda, my partner, she and I were like, well, maybe we can move towards eating less meat more often, trying to get our meat from like the farmer's market or a delivery, like a mail service that is only pastured and has sustainable practices, and kind of just shifting the dial a little bit, similar to what you're talking about, where it's not that we don't ever eat meat, but that maybe we don't need meat with every meal.
Exactly.
We have some eggs for breakfast or some overnight oats with some protein powders in it. Yeah. We take care of one meal with a no-kill approach in that capacity. Maybe lunch is a vegetarian meal, and then maybe there's some animal protein in either lunch or dinner once a day. Because that's already better. Because I definitely eat animal protein for lunch and dinner every day, pretty much.
Yeah. I mean, when you look at like, a bowl of tofu and lentils, and that has like 30, 40 grams of protein in it right there. Yeah. It really is. And I totally agree. And I think that like, instead of it just being binary, think of it as more of a dial or a continuum of just like how much. Yeah. And anywhere we can find room to just not just have this conditioned response to eating meat, but think, okay, chicken tastes like nothing really, and that's why it's palatable, and we can kind of mix it in. Now, so is tofu, and if you can just kind of make that mindset shift of like, well, I can just throw that in a bowl with some lentils and have a really satisfying meal that has just as much protein as the meat version would, you get used to it, and then I at least start to really appreciate how it's kind of satisfying the protein itch, obviously, but then just making a slightly better choice for the planet and factory farming. Yeah. But there's all kinds of stuff, and I know a lot of vegan bodybuilders and like influencers who are freaking jacked, and like you can absolutely do it. It just takes a little extra thinking. You just got an extra degree of planning and thinking through and understanding food and the nutrients that each one of these food choices have. Yeah. But it's definitely possible.
It's definitely possible. And just making it palatable, I don't think it's, this kind of gets into a larger conversation about cooking and making sure you actually cook food and having some bravery to try some recipes. But even just, we kind of make this Mediterranean bowl here and there. It's one of the meals that comes in our orbit. And last night I saw this thing with these like little roasted chickpeas, and you basically get some tahini, which is just like ground sesame seeds, I believe, right?
Yeah.
Just coat your chickpeas in it, put some like smoked paprika, and
Oh yeah.
bake them, and they become these like crispy little delicious items. You know,
Totally.
pretty high in protein, pretty low in fat, all things considered.
Yep.
You know, and so it's like little things like that where I don't think it just has to be like a boring plate of like steamed broccoli and carrots where you're just like, Because I think a lot of time when people think about vegan food,
Right.
even in the documentary, they're just like, look at this like bowl of boring vegetables sometimes, you know, from the participants. And I think you can jazz it up, you know.
Totally. So what would you rate this documentary, like message? How would you rate it 1 to 10? How did it impact you, the messaging?
That's the thing. So because it did have an impact on me. I did think there were just some major holes on just information given and things. So I see it from both directions. I wish it wasn't agendaed, but I expect it to be. I do think it was a unique study that hasn't been done before, even with the holes in it. I do think it was something that it would be cool to see more twin studies. Probably won't happen for a minute now because of this one, but maybe not. And I'm gonna rate it. A 6.5.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's what keeps coming to mind.
Yeah.
I don't want to throw it under the bus any worse, but I can't give it much higher either. Like I'm going to land over the line of good. More positive than not.
Yep.
As a whole.
I agree. I would probably say the same. You know, it wasn't equally represented. They weren't showing any benefits of lean protein consumption, whether it be from plants or animals. There's just a lot. There's a lot of bias, which is hard for me because I have pretty much dedicated my life to try to speak truth around nutrition to people. So when I see stuff like that, I'm just like, gosh, can we just have a balanced study? So, yeah, it'd be cool to like maybe get another study, something like that, with twins who are a little bit more committed to the process and could really do the thing, and we can take some really accurate measures. You know, that'd be a really great one to see. But yeah, I agree. Just like in terms of just the sort of dogma approach and the anecdotal science and just the blanket statements, and it's hard for me to like get super behind it. But it is always painful to see these factory farm images, but it's also important and try to not pretend like they don't exist. So in that sense, it did open my eyes. I did appreciate it on that angle. So I would say 6.5, 6.5 as well. I'm not going to give it a 0. I didn't hate it.
Zero is like it's misinformation.
Yeah, I just wish that we could, and I just wish that the doctors and the PhDs and all these people that were on there would just put their foot down around better science, because that's what they've essentially dedicated their life to, I thought, right? So that's my 2 cents. Yeah.
What do you think?
What do you think, world?
People out there.
Okay, cool. Well, I guess that'll do it for today.
Yeah, it was fun to chat. I'm sure this will come up again.
Definitely.
The topic of veganism versus meat eating.
And we should maybe you and I can do an episode where we just we just look at our own research and kind of come to some conclusions on pros and cons, and we can lay that out for everybody. But all right, guys, we'll check you all next time.
Around the curve.
Justin and Ethan are out.